Okay, maybe somebody can answer me this question. When did the United States of America, the greatest country in the world, become a nation of crybabies? Think about that for a second. Think about how this country was founded, how we stood up to our oppressors of England, broke away, and formed our own nation. Now, during that process, a lot of things happened. Some negative, but also a lot positive. You know, even when I was growing up, you could have differences of opinion even with your best friends, and it was okay. Your political beliefs, your spiritual beliefs, everything could be completely different, but you could still be okay. People weren't unfriending people. Of course, you had to do that the real way. Actually, stop being friends with somebody, not over a social media type thing. But for the most part, you know, you could have civilized, maybe heated, but still civilized conversation. What I am trying to figure out is what happened to this country. Our nation has become a laughingstock to other nations because what's coming up? And what do I mean by that? What I mean is, you know, when you're a kid and somebody hurts your feelings, you might shed a tear, and then after a while, you know, you kind of develop a skin. Not that you're insensitive or anything, but you just kind of get tough. And it's not just guys, women do that too. But what I'm seeing is people are getting offended by every little thing. And I don't understand this. And I blame a lot of it on the media because the media puts out this big fear thing. They don't do like in the old days with Walter Cronkite when you just came out and said the news and you let the public decide how they feel about a certain instance. Heck, even Cronkite cried on the air when he announced that JFK was shot. But now, people are offended by statues. Say they represent evil. I don't think they know what evil is. They're worried about statues of Confederate generals, but they don't know the history behind a lot of them. Robert E. Lee, general for the Confederate States, was from Virginia. When President Lincoln could see that the Civil War was about to break out, and Civil War is that kind of really strange term because Of course, in America, we call ours the war between the states, which is more accurate because Civil War was not really civil, if you think about it. But General Grant was chosen by Abe Lincoln to lead the Union troops. I'm sorry, I meant not Grant, General Lee. General Lee was chosen initially by Lincoln to lead the Union troops. He actually served with Grant during the Mexican War. But Lee had some serious questions in his head. I mean, he was from Virginia. He was from the South. And he could not bring himself to fight against those where he lived. I mean, he had slaves, but he had actually freed his slaves. And what a lot of people don't know is that when it came time to pay his taxes for his plantation, he wrote a letter to his wife sending her to pay for his taxes for his house, his property. Of course, the Union was very tricky, and they said they would not accept it except it came from him. So they ended up confiscating his home. You know what that home is? It's no home to thousands of our brave men and women who have died in combat. Arlington National Cemetery. General Bedford Forrest, who a lot of people say that he is instrumental in the creation of the Ku Klux Klan. And for the longest time, they've had this ugly statue down here in Nashville, which I really didn't think looked like the guy. But it really, if you know the history behind it, in his later years, he actually met a good Christian woman and he became a Christian himself. So all his past ideals were gone. You know, they say leave things in the past. Well, a lot of people have trouble with that. Statues are a way to remember. It doesn't glorify the South. Believe it or not, there was actually black slaves who served in the Confederate Army. Because the Confederates needed an edge, so they often offered freedom to those who served. I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, so I might get some things wrong, so feel free to check it up and correct me if you will. But getting back to my story, people are just so offended by everything. One of the beloved cartoon characters of my youth, actually two, is Elmer Fudd and Yosemite Sam. Elmer Fudd is a hunter. They took away his gun because people were offended. What they're going to have him do? Pick daisies now? Yosemite Sam, who's kind of like the bad guy in all the cartoons he's in with bugs and all that. He's a cowboy. Cowboys have guns. And then they have a children's show called Paw Patrol, in which one of the dogs, because they're all like human type characters, one of them is a police dog. They canceled that. HBO and Netflix and all these other places have, for the time being, taken down Gone with the Wind. Because it depicts slavery in a negative fashion. No, slavery was negative. It was the Civil War. It was the Old South. You know, it wasn't pretty. When people say that this current generation is trying to erase history, I don't think it's so much that. I don't think people want visible reminders of history that they depict as negative. There was a Jewish woman, I can't remember her name, so you feel free to look it up, who had served in one of the German prison camps. Auschwitz, I think it was. And she says that she is glad that it is still there. It is a reminder of the evil that is in this world and what we must do to combat it. And then today I was watching a YouTube video, and there's a video with John Snyder, Bo Duke from the Dukes of Hazzard, who posed a question. And his question was, do you think that the Dukes of Hazzard was racist? And I answered him, I said, no, I don't. I mean, actually, one of the recurring characters was a black sheriff over in the next county. I mean, you never heard them using the N-word or anything negative about any race. I mean, I even know one of the gimmicks that they always had on the show was that Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane would have a speed trap set up, and when the country artist would come by in the bus, he'd stop them for speeding, and the way out of the ticket was for them to perform at the Boar's Nest, the local club. And I think one of those, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of those performers was Charley Pride. And on that subject, you have NASCAR has finally said that at their races they will now permit people to kneel during the national anthem and they are no longer allowed to wave the Confederate flags at the races. For one, the people who are making these complaints don't go to races. They just don't. And I will proudly born and raised in Pennsylvania, but I've been living in Nashville for about 25 years now, maybe longer. And as they affectionately would say, I'm a damn Yankee, meaning that I came down here and I stayed as opposed to going home. But what people don't realize is that for those Southerners who have their rebel flag, which they wave at the races or at college football games or whatever, it has nothing to do with war, slavery, racism. It's a symbol of their Southern pride, proud of being Southern. I think the thing that gets me the most is that there's one place that there's supposed to be a statue of George Washington, the person we say is our first president, founder of our country. And they want to remove the statue because it reminds them of slavery. Yes, he had slaves. But the thing is, we were trying to put our current morality on how things were over 200 years ago. We cannot change the past. People need to accept the past for what it was and go on. That's why when I hear things like certain people want us to play reputations or whatever for all those whose ancestors were enslaved. Well, I hate to tell you, but there is not a black man and woman alive today. I take that back, because it might have been somebody who came from another country in Africa or whatever where they were slaves. But for the most part, your average African American male woman has never been a slave, and your average white person has never owned a slave. So let it rest. We have to live together. We have to build a future together. And how can we do this if we're being offended by every little thing? One of my favorite movies from the early 70s was Blazing Saddles. Now, you have to know a couple things about this movie. It made fun of everyone. The man who wrote it, directed it, and even had a couple of parts in it, Mel Brooks, Jewish. One of his lead actors, Cleavon Little, black. But they made fun of everybody. It was all equal. And it wasn't in a negative manner. And what people don't understand, what's really funny, is that people don't know that one of the writers on the movie for the screenplay was Richard Pryor. Think about that. What do we have to do? I mean, they used to say this thing, No, forget that. Let me say this. Back in the early 80s, there were two shows which were connected. One was All in the Family, who he was a white conservative bigot. His son-in-law was a liberal. But one of the most classic moments on that show was when he met Sammy Davis. Now, Sammy pulled a fast one on him because they were supposed to get their picture taken together. And when they went to take the picture, Sammy kissed him on the cheek. It was classic. But the show that spun off from that was even more so with the Jeffersons. George Jefferson was even more of a racist than Archie was. He didn't see it that way, but he was. Now, on the original show, because censors at the time, I guess, were more lenient, and they were trying to get that edge, George, if he was upset against another black character who was like hitting on his wife or whatever, he would call them the N-word. And then there was his word for white people, which was honky, which also was supposed to be his negative connotation description of white people. Now, just last year, CBS did a thing for like the anniversary for Norman Lear, and so they did episodes from both those shows. And on All in the Family, you had actors like Woody Harrelson, who played Archie, and for Jeffersons, you had Jamie Foxx, who played George Jefferson. And on that show, they did this whole thing, of course, where George would say the N-word, they bleeped it out. But it's funny, though, that when George was calling Tom Willis honky, that wasn't bleeped out. I thought that was strange. Should I be offended by that? I say that in sarcasm because, people just need to get over it. How can we start to get through something if every time you see a TV show you don't like, you complain? Turn it off if you don't want to watch it. Or if you see a statue, instead of thinking about the history, you get offended. Just something to think about.